Your brain doesn't distinguish between real confidence and manufactured bravado. The neural pathways firing when you inspire others are identical to those activated when you manipulate them. The most successful leaders and the most dangerous psychopaths share the exact same neurological signatures, separated only by choices their brains are systematically designed to ignore. When researchers place individuals with varying confidence levels into fMRI scanners, the results reveal a disturbing pattern. The medial prefrontal cortex, which fires intensely during moments of self-assurance, shows nearly identical activation patterns to those observed in individuals diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. This isn't merely correlation, it's a fundamental overlap in the neural architecture that governs how we perceive our own capabilities and worth. The dopaminergic pathways that reinforce confident behavior create what neuroscientists call reward-seeking loops. Each time you successfully assert dominance, influence an outcome, or command attention, your brain releases dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. This same neurochemical cascade occurs in individuals exhibiting Machiavellian manipulation tactics. Your brain cannot distinguish between ethical influence and exploitative control, both trigger identical reward responses. Studies tracking executives over 5-year periods demonstrate that those who scored highest on initial confidence assessments showed progressive increases in what psychologists term callous unemotional traits. The empathy regulating regions of their brains, specifically the mirror neuron networks in the inferior parietal lobule, showed decreased activation over time. They weren't becoming more evil, they were becoming more neurologically detached from the emotional experiences of others. The temporal parietal junction, responsible for theory of mind and perspective taking, exhibits reduced connectivity in highly confident individuals. This creates a psychological blind spot where your ability to accurately assess how your actions affect others becomes compromised. You maintain the illusion of being considerate while simultaneously becoming less capable of genuine consideration. Perhaps most concerning is the relationship between confidence and cognitive flexibility. The anterior cingulate cortex, which normally helps us adapt our behavior when we receive negative feedback, shows dampened responses in individuals with elevated self-assurance. This means that confident people become progressively less responsive to social cues, indicating they're causing harm. The neuroplasticity research reveals that these changes aren't permanent, but they are cumulative. Each confident interaction strengthens neural pathways associated with dominance while weakening those associated with empathy and moral reasoning. Your brain is literally rewiring itself to prioritize your success over others' welfare, and this process occurs completely outside your conscious awareness. The anterior cingulate cortex functions as your brain's moral alarm system, firing rapidly when you encounter ethical dilemmas or witness unfair treatment. Under normal circumstances, this region maintains constant vigilance, scanning your behavior and the behavior of others for potential moral violations. However, when you experience elevated personal power, whether through leadership roles, financial success, or social influence, this critical monitoring system begins to malfunction. Neuroimaging studies reveal that individuals in high-power positions show up to 40% reduced activity in the anterior cingulate cortex when presented with scenarios involving ethical decision-making. This isn't a conscious choice to ignore moral considerations. It's an involuntary neurological response where your brain literally becomes less capable of detecting ethical violations. The very neural circuits that would normally alert you to potential harm you might cause others become progressively muted. The mechanism operates through what researchers call power-induced disinhibition. As your social or professional status increases, your brain reduces the energy allocated to monitoring systems and redirects it toward goal pursuit networks. The orbital frontal cortex, which normally applies the brakes to potentially harmful impulses, shows decreased connectivity with emotion processing regions. You maintain the intellectual understanding that actions have consequences, but you lose the visceral, gut-level responses that typically prevent harmful behavior. This neurological dampening explains why powerful individuals often appear genuinely surprised when confronted with evidence of their harmful actions. Their brains have literally stopped registering these behaviors as problematic. The insula, which processes emotional empathy and moral disgust, shows reduced activation in response to others' suffering. What appears to be callous indifference is actually neurological impairment. Their brains have become less capable of experiencing the emotional responses that normally guide ethical behavior. The power-morality disconnect becomes self-reinforcing through a process called moral disengagement. As your ethical sensitivity decreases, you make increasingly questionable decisions, which feel justified because your brain isn't triggering the normal alarm responses. Each unethical act that goes unchallenged by your internal monitoring system makes the next one easier to rationalize and execute. Perhaps most insidiously, this moral dampening occurs gradually and unconsciously. Unlike sudden personality changes that might alert you to a problem, power-induced moral insensitivity develops slowly, allowing you to maintain the belief that you're still the same ethical person you've always been, even as your behavior systematically contradicts that self-perception. The human brain operates on what neuroscientists call implementation independence, meaning the neural mechanisms that execute a behavior remain identical regardless of the moral context surrounding that behavior. When you practice visualization techniques to improve athletic performance, you're strengthening the same prefrontal motor cortex pathways that professional manipulators use to rehearse deceptive scenarios. Your brain cannot distinguish between visualizing a successful business presentation and visualizing a successful con operation. Consider the neuroplasticity research on mirror neuron training, commonly marketed as emotional intelligence development. These exercises enhance your ability to read microexpressions, detect emotional states, and predict behavioral responses in others. The superior temporal sulcus becomes more sensitive to social cues, while the medial prefrontal cortex develops stronger predictive models of human behavior. These exact same neural adaptations allow skilled manipulators to identify vulnerable individuals and exploit their psychological triggers with surgical precision. Cognitive behavioral therapy techniques designed to build mental resilience create what researchers call emotional regulation flexibility. You learn to control your emotional responses, maintain composure under pressure, and override your natural empathetic reactions when necessary. While this can prevent anxiety and depression, it also creates the psychological foundation for what clinicians term instrumental aggression, the ability to cause harm without experiencing the emotional distress that would normally inhibit such behavior. The dopaminergic reward pathways activated by successful goal achievement operate identically whether your goals serve others or exploit them. Each time you successfully influence someone's behavior, your brain releases the same neurochemical cocktail regardless of whether that influence helped them achieve their dreams or manipulated them into serving your interests. The ventral tegmental area cannot perform moral calculations. It simply reinforces behaviors that produce desired outcomes. Perhaps most concerning is how mindfulness and meditation practices designed to increase self-awareness can paradoxically reduce moral sensitivity when practiced without ethical frameworks. Enhanced interoceptive awareness allows you to remain calm while causing psychological harm to others. The increased emotional regulation can suppress guilt, empathy, and moral discomfort, the very emotions that typically prevent harmful behavior. The neuroscience is unambiguous. Every tool that increases your psychological sophistication increases both your capacity for profound positive impact and your potential for causing devastating harm. The same enhanced self-control that helps you resist unhealthy impulses can help you resist moral impulses. The identical pattern recognition abilities that make you an insightful leader can make you a masterful predator. The transition from ethical influence to manipulative control operates through what neuroscientists call gradient descent, learning. Your brain continuously optimizes for reward without regard to the methods that produce those rewards. Each successful interaction that achieves your desired outcome strengthens the neural pathways associated with that behavior, regardless of whether you achieved success through genuine value creation or subtle exploitation. The striatum, your brain's primary reward processing center, evaluates outcomes purely in terms of goal achievement and dopamine release. When you successfully persuade someone to change their behavior, your brain experiences identical neurochemical satisfaction, whether you did so by presenting compelling evidence or by exploiting their insecurities. This creates what researchers term ethical drift, a gradual shift toward increasingly manipulative tactics that occurs entirely outside conscious decision-making. The prefrontal cortex houses your explicit moral reasoning abilities, but it operates much slower than the limbic reward systems. By the time your conscious mind evaluates the ethics of a particular influence attempt, your unconscious brain has already cataloged the successful outcome and begun strengthening the associated neural pathways. You rationalize the behavior after the fact, creating post hoc justifications that allow you to maintain your self-image as an ethical person, while simultaneously reinforcing manipulative patterns. Neuroplasticity research reveals that this process accelerates under stress or time pressure. When your amygdala detects threat, whether physical, financial, or social, it triggers what neuroscientists call executive override, temporarily suppressing the prefrontal cortex ethical monitoring functions. During these moments, your brain defaults to whatever influence strategies have previously produced successful outcomes, regardless of their moral implications. The insidious nature of this process lies in its gradual progression. Your brain doesn't suddenly switch from ethical to manipulative behavior. Instead, it slowly expands the range of tactics it considers acceptable. Each boundary crossed makes the next boundary easier to rationalize. The anterior cingulate cortex, which normally signals when you're violating your own moral standards, becomes progressively less sensitive to ethical violations through a process called moral habituation. Perhaps most troubling is how this unconscious optimization can corrupt positive intentions. You might genuinely want to help someone, but if manipulative tactics prove more effective than honest persuasion, your brain will unconsciously gravitate toward manipulation while maintaining the conscious belief that you're acting in their best interests. The road to psychological exploitation is paved with good intentions and reinforced by neurochemical rewards that operate below the threshold of awareness. The human brain operates with what cognitive scientists call positive self-regard maintenance, a powerful psychological mechanism that preserves your belief in your own moral character regardless of contradictory evidence. This system works through selective attention, where your brain literally filters out information that challenges your self-perception while amplifying data that confirms your positive self-image. When you cause psychological harm to others, your brain engages in what researchers term motivated reasoning to reconstruct the narrative in ways that preserve your sense of being a good person. The anterior cingulate cortex and medial prefrontal cortex work together to create what neuroscientists call moral self-licensing, the psychological phenomenon where good intentions or past ethical behavior provide unconscious permission for current harmful actions. Your brain maintains a running moral ledger, and positive intentions create credits that can be unconsciously spent on questionable behavior. This neural accounting system allows you to cause genuine harm while experiencing no guilt or recognition of wrongdoing. Confirmation bias operates at the neurological level through selective activation of memory networks. When evaluating your own behavior, your brain preferentially accesses memories that support your intended interpretation while suppressing contradictory recollections. The hippocampus, responsible for memory formation and retrieval, shows biased activation patterns that favor self-serving narratives. You literally remember events differently when you're the perpetrator versus when you're observing similar behavior in others. The fundamental attribution error becomes neurologically hardwired through repeated activation of specific cognitive pathways. When others cause harm, your brain automatically attributes their behavior to character flaws and malicious intent. When you cause identical harm, your brain attributes it to circumstances, good intentions gone wrong, or misunderstandings. The superior temporal sulcus, which processes social attributions, shows systematically different activation patterns when evaluating self versus other behavior. Perhaps most insidiously, the psychological immune system that protects your self-image becomes stronger with practice. Each time you successfully rationalize harmful behavior, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with self-justification. The orbitofrontal cortex becomes increasingly sophisticated at generating explanations that preserve your moral self-concept while allowing increasingly harmful behavior. The neuroplasticity research reveals that individuals who score highest on measures of moral conviction often demonstrate the greatest capacity for causing harm while maintaining psychological comfort. Their brains have developed robust justification systems that can rationalize almost any behavior as consistent with their values. Good intentions become a psychological shield that prevents recognition of actual impact, creating a dangerous disconnect between self-perception and reality. Interoceptive awareness represents one of the most sophisticated forms of neural integration, requiring coordination between the insula, anterior cingulate cortex, and prefrontal regions to create real-time monitoring of both internal physiological states and external social dynamics. This isn't passive self-reflection, it's active neurological surveillance that operates continuously in the background of consciousness. Research using advanced neuroimaging techniques reveals that individuals capable of ethical power demonstrate enhanced connectivity between these monitoring networks and their executive control systems. The insula serves as your internal radar system, constantly scanning for physiological markers of moral discomfort, subtle changes in heart rate, muscle tension, and gut sensations that signal potential ethical violations before they reach conscious awareness. However, this system requires deliberate cultivation through what neuroscientists call somatic marker training. You must learn to recognize and respond to these bodily signals rather than suppressing them in pursuit of your goals. Developing ethical oversight systems requires rewiring the brain's default reward pathways through conscious intervention. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex must be trained to factor long-term social consequences into immediate decision-making processes. This involves creating what researchers term ethical decision trees, automated mental routines that evaluate potential actions against multiple moral frameworks before implementation. These neural subroutines become strengthened through repetition until they operate as automatically as breathing. The challenge lies in maintaining these monitoring systems under pressure. When stress hormones like cortisol flood your system, they systematically impair the very brain regions responsible for ethical oversight. The prefrontal cortex becomes less responsive, while the amygdala's threat detection systems can hijack decision-making processes. Ethical power requires developing what neuroscientists call stress-resistant moral cognition, the ability to maintain ethical standards even when your brain's alarm systems are activated. Advanced practitioners develop what researchers term metacognitive awareness, the ability to monitor their own monitoring systems. This involves recognizing when your ethical oversight mechanisms are becoming compromised and implementing compensatory strategies. Some individuals create external accountability systems that bypass internal monitoring when it becomes unreliable, while others develop environmental cues that automatically trigger ethical reflection. The neuroplasticity research demonstrates that ethical power isn't a fixed trait, but a skill that can be developed through deliberate practice. However, it requires constant maintenance and conscious cultivation. The moment you stop actively monitoring your impact, your brain's default optimization systems begin prioritizing efficiency over ethics, gradually eroding the very capabilities that enable responsible influence. The next time you feel that surge of influence over others, pause and ask yourself, are you building them up or breaking them down for your benefit? Your brain won't tell you the difference, but your conscience can if you choose to listen. Subscribe if you're ready to wield power without becoming the villain in someone else's story.